Very special time for me because I have Tushar and Krijn in the CTO Studio with me today talking about intellectual property and patenting. Hey guys, Tushar, want to
Hey,
introduce yourself?
yeah, I'm Tushar Dadlani. I was a CTO at a startup called Explorer.ai in the self-driving car space. And recently, about 2 years back, I joined Standard Cognition as a director of engineering working on autonomous checkout. And it's a pleasure to be here.
I love it. Do you build vehicles where two passengers can sit, uh, one on the passenger seat and one in the back, and then watch the car drive?
Not really. That's not safe.
Unbelievable. I'm just amazed at what the limits that humans are willing to go to is insane. I own a Tesla, and there's no way in hell I will let my hands off the steering wheel when autopilot is on. Cool. Stunned silence. Krijn, introduce yourself, brother.
Krijn Vanderrot. I'm currently lead a bunch of teams at Folio in San Diego. We do property management SaaS software. And a few companies ago, I was at Great Call, where we developed some intellectual property and we set up a patent program. And really, we just like found a good lawyer to help us. And so, yeah, that's what we're here to talk about.
I love it. I love it. Tushar, did I breach some sort of non-disclosure or something about talking about self-driving cars crashing? Are we good?
Yeah, we are good. No breach of any non-disclosures.
Okay. Okay.
Chen,
So
when I read that story, by the way, about what happened, for like a split second, you did pop into my mind. Uh, I was
wow.
very happy to read that it was nowhere near San Diego and it wasn't you. I'm just kidding.
Wow.
You wouldn't be that irresponsible, would you?
No, I have often wondered why they called it autopilot, because that is such an aspirational phrase, and the airline industry has done so well with autopilot that I'm really I just tell people the car can do adjusted cruise control and it can stay in a lane. That is nowhere near autopilot.
No, my
Tushar,
wife's
just
Subaru.
quickly, what did you do in the? Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say my wife's Subaru can do that.
Exactly. In fact, I have a little Nissan Rogue that can do that now, so I think we're good. Tushar, in the autonomous driving space, what did you guys do?
Yeah, so we were building maps for self-driving cars. So a big part of the challenge with self-driving cars is the volume of data and the ability to compress the data in a meaningful representation. And I look at maps as one of those entities which take the environment and compress it in digital form to really understand that. So a lot of our work was around building a platform to solve this problem, because there is a big challenge in, for example, there's a construction zone, right? Like in the case of like the crash that happened on 101 in the Tesla, there was some uh, there was some challenges around understanding that how do you distinguish which is the lane and which is the non-lane, because there is a white line, right? How do you switch between that? So having that kind of fidelity on map updates was a very important part for a lot of the self-driving cars, especially in the cities. Like suddenly there'll be a construction zone that will pop up, and the self-driving car would just they would cancel out those areas. And so if you're in a very critical, if a critical road has construction, instead of a usual like 10-minute, instead of it becoming a 15-minute ride, it would become a 1 hour ride because the self-driving car would just loop around the whole city because it would just block out all areas which would not be able to drive past. So map updates was a big challenge, and it still continues to be a big challenge. And I think that's like self-driving cars are not yet fully there in a single city, like a full city as well. So the problem still exists, but we as a company moved on into autonomous checkout and retail.
The same company or a different company?
No, we got acquired into, like, they acquired us
Okay.
for our real-time intelligence
I think
technology.
the self-driving car thing can be solved by putting tracks where cars can drive and then putting steel wheels on the cars and then having the cars drive on those tracks. Because then the car can just go.
And that, like, isn't that public transportation?
Anyways, so something that I've been thinking about a lot recently is when our companies grow and scale, and we're CTOing these companies, that one of the responsibilities that a CTO has is to, I call it, shield the organization. So by shield, it's both defensive and in a way offensive. So defensive, what are we doing to protect our company's competitive advantage? How are we staying ahead of the curve? How are we complying with regulations? And how are we not being caught with our hands asleep at the wheel? Okay, too soon. Around technologies, but also the intellectual property of our companies. And I know a lot of CTOs are stuck in implementation land, and a lot of CTOs think that that's the extent to which they play an important role in the company, or they graduate to tech strategy and innovation and thinking ahead of the curve. But there is a very important aspect in my mind to the role of CTO, which is how am I identifying and protecting my company's intellectual property? So one thing I like to see is when we're sort of deconstructing our architectures and saying, well, if we solved 100 problems to get this product out the door, are there maybe 2 or 3 solutions that are in and of itself a piece of intellectual property that we can use to leverage and build more value into our companies? And so the patenting process is obviously a notorious one because of, the bazillion patents out there governing some small aspect of our lives in every single way. But then there are multiple reasons to do patents and why companies do patents. And so the first question, and the reason I have both of you on here, is because you both have experience in this field. And so I want to talk about the patenting process and, from your experience, what that entails. So speaking to the CTO who may never have thought about this, what does the process even look like? I think the first resistance to this process is my idea unique enough to even go through this whole process? But I'd like to talk about the process, but I'd like to bookend the conversation with, when should we look into patenting, or when should intellectual property become the focal point of our company? And then talk about the process of patenting and what that entails and your experiences, just what you went through. And then potentially at the end of our conversation, the dangers that we face if we don't patent. So do we get caught off guard by patent trolls and blah, blah, blah? And when does that happen? And then maybe at the end we can high-five each other with some uplifting, positive news, because we'll all be so down in the dumps. So that's kind of where I'd like to go with this. And both of you have experience, and really that's all I just want to tap into. And then if you have any theoretical knowledge about stuff, feel free to throw that in there, or any resources or books or anything. We'll do that. So does that sound like a plan?
Yes.
Okay.
Sounds good.
I'm going to clap my... great. Krijn, there's a bit of a lag with you, just FYI.
Yeah,
so,
I noticed that.
If I interrupt you... Yeah, so I'm going to keep that in mind as we speak. So don't worry about it. We'll just compensate for that. So I'm going to clap my hand, and then we'll get the episode started for an introduction version 2, because I don't want to talk about the car stuff. Okay?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay. So Nick, if you hear this, this is where the episode starts. Krijn and Tushar are on the show with me today in the CTO Studio, and we're going to be talking about intellectual property, patenting, not patenting, trolling, all the good stuff that comes with scaling companies that start to attract a lot of attention and a lot of cash. So, quick introductions, Tushar and Krijn. Tushar, brief introduction from you. Krijn, brief introduction from you, and then we'll get the show on the road.
Hey everybody, I'm Tushar Dadlani. I started a company called Explorer.ai in the self-driving car space. We were building maps for self-driving cars. And that's a very high intellectual property space, as you have probably heard about Waymo versus Uber. And more recently, I work at Standard Cognition, where we were acquired to build autonomous checkout solutions. And a big part of my experience with patents has been both at very early stages of the company and also after getting acquired, transferring patents and a variety of things that come with that. And yeah, happy to be here.
Wonderful. How about you, Krijn?
Yeah, I'm Krijn Vanderraat. I'm currently, I lead teams doing product development at Appfolio here in San Diego. And 2 companies ago, I was with Great Call, where we developed mobile tech and connected health solutions for senior citizens. And I think we had about somewhere between 30 and 40 patents there. We set up a patent program. I created a few myself, and then we helped engineers develop their ideas into, patentable ideas, and we would reward them for that. So I have some experience setting that up. We also had some, not exactly, we had some litigation revolving around intellectual property and patents, some ways to work around that. And I remember one troll who we scared off, and that was about it. It's my experience with patents is from a few years ago, and the world has changed a little bit with regards to software patents. But I think a lot of the experiences we had then setting it up probably still pretty valuable.
Absolutely. I love it. And so I want to talk specifically about the need and the focus that a CTO should have on shielding their organization against a risky future. And intellectual property is obviously something that gets developed all the time. I think unbeknownst to CTOs, we're solving so many problems that are technically patentable. And so my first question to the two of you is, when should a CTO start thinking about, should we protect this intellectual property? Or when does a company look to each other and say, oh my goodness, we need to file a patent for this because X? Kind of want to get a sense for when, in your experience, was this something that was regarded as worth the effort and something to be pursued?
I can give a quick thought to that. So the way we thought about this was, what is a competitive landscape? And I think a lot of times patents is mostly about timing, and because the ordering of patents and thinking about what do we patent first, when does this become commodity in the world, is a big part of it. Because today you might patent a computer vision model, but tomorrow Google provides it as a service in Google Cloud, and that's like you lost your like any advantage that you might have had. So I think a big part of strategy early on is to start thinking very aggressively is what can I patent early, because eventually when you start thinking about potentially getting acquired, the acquirer is looking at when did your patents start, like at what point did you have this patent, because a bigger company might have already patented that at a later date, a similar patent. So when you're defending legally against that company, you are better suited to be acquired because your patents were dated much before the bigger company. So a lot of the litigation protection is typically from the big tech companies or the big fish in that specific industry or that technology domain. So a lot of our focus was, where will these bigger companies head into, and how do we need to protect ourselves against the bigger tech companies, because at some point they should acquire or license the patent instead of just copying whatever intellectual property we might have developed in the process. So, but the flip side of it is, this is once a patent is published, it's public information. So a big company probably has a lot more resources to just reverse engineer whatever you've put out there and never give you credit. So you it's a risk, it's a risky proposition in a lot of ways, but and like believing in the ideas of like open source, it is always like, let's share our ideas, because as humanity we can progress better. So that's kind of how we look at it.
That is a fascinating rock and a hard place. Do I just start off and run as hard as I can and patent as much as I can in the hopes of getting there first, but then at the risk of exposing myself? Or do I wait until I see that the idea has legs, develop customers, build revenue, build a war chest, and then go after these things? Krijn, in your experience with your previous companies, what was the approach and the thinking around when to do and file patents?
Yeah, we started filing patents pretty early on at Great Call because the founders were pretty experienced. We had some institutional investment. So by the time I joined, we already had like one or two patents, I believe. We started kicking that up a notch a few years later because it seemed to us like it would increase the valuation of the company if we had a robust patent portfolio. And we were nowhere near, going public or getting acquired at the time, but we knew that it takes years to build up a good portfolio, so we wanted to get started on that. I'll say that from the perspective of protecting your intellectual property, don't start doing patents before you've figured out your open source software licensing situation, because that's actually the biggest risk. If you happen to have like a GPL or some copyleft license in there and you're trying to raise money or get acquired, and the parties doing diligence find out, they don't have to pay you a cent for your intellectual property because they're going to get it for free through a lawyer. So do that first. But that's not what we're talking about here, really. Um, so yeah, we started pretty early on, and we just wanted to do a little bit of everything: offensive, defensive, focus patents. We weren't worried about big tech companies because they didn't even consider our space to be interesting, and They do now, but at the time we didn't consider them competitors. So most of our competitors were, other companies that were building, I've fallen and I can't get up type technology. So they were not developing quickly. It was all kind of outdated, and so it was more to protect our advantage from any future potential competitors there.
Yeah, that's the second or third time that I've heard people talk about a portfolio of patents. So the onesies and the twosies and the threesies versus the 50 or the 100 patents. And recently I spoke with someone who described it as when investors look at your patent portfolio, they want to see if there's good coverage. So they might not dig into the specific patent or the specific value of one patent, but hey, if this company has 100 patents, they have good coverage in this space. Is that how that went for you guys, Krijn?
Yeah, pretty much. The example that our patent committee and our lawyer used was Apple, and they're known for patenting lots of little things, and it makes it really hard to copy their tech. And I believe this is why a lightning cable is so expensive, is because you can't really make that cable without paying Apple a bunch of licensing fees. So for us, we tried to spread it out a bit too, just so that it's the best way to provide kind of like IP insurance protection that way, right? So if a competitor, comes along and says that you infringe on one of their patents, you have a portfolio of, large variety of things to throw back at them, and the same in the other direction. If they try to copy your products, you have a better chance of going back and telling them, well, look, you're infringing on this and this and that. Let's start talking licensing fees, or you have to stop selling that product, whatever. So it wasn't very focused. It was much broader, not very deep for us. And I mean, whether it worked better, we did this one thing and it worked out well for us, but that's just one data point, right? I wouldn't say like that's the best strategy for everyone. I definitely recommend people get an experienced patent attorney that understands their tech and that can help them come up with a good strategy, and don't just take what worked for one company and then think it works for you as well.
Yeah, I will say, and we'll get into the process, the sort of the process that you went through to patent. But I heard someone say that the difference between working with a patent attorney that understood the domain versus did not understand the domain was literally hundreds of hours. So it's very interesting because you are working with attorneys who may not understand this stuff. And so he actually recommended they worked with a patent attorneys who had computer science backgrounds, and it was a completely different experience for them. Tushar, let's stick with the timing. The timing is still a very interesting thing for me. So, from what Krijn is saying, there are these two worlds. There's these two levels of patenting. There's the patenting for patenting's sake, where the number is important. It communicates authority, coverage, whatever. And then there's something that you mentioned, which is, actually protecting the idea so that you can shield your company from future big tech initiatives. Is that how you decided when to go after this stuff?
So for us, I think it was also like signaling and committing to this is our like secret sauce in some ways, uh, and putting it out there in a early enough that because when you're in a startup in a very like domain heavy area, you want to really think about what is your like true secret sauce and you want to protect that secret sauce. So with the hope that your execution can catch up to your idea. But I think a big part for us, the timing was we might not build all of this, but we think this idea is patentable. Let's talk to a patent attorney, understand, like that was the first time I was like doing a patent like in my own startup. So it was a very interesting experience. Uh, so just spoke to a patent attorney. They kind of figure out what is patentable and what all you blabbered to them, and then you kind of iterate on the process a couple of times, and then they figure out the rest of the
Okay, so
filing process.
having been through this process, both of you, is by the way, I've never been through this process. I've always said, "Oh, we should patent this," or blah blah. I've always been sort of in the C-suite, like, "Oh, this is an idea we can patent," but then nothing happens. But is it is 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 the idea being patented actually, is it a lot looser and less sexy than we think? Or have we idealized, oh, patents are these amazing things that truly encompass the spirit of innovation, and can I add my voice to that? Or is it really a mundane doofus thing that I can patent the way I push my chair in underneath my own table so that I can make the wheels last longer and on any surface? I mean, are we in la la land with what can be patented, and should we always be looking at things differently? Or is it an outpost of ideation and the protection of true intellectual property?
I can i can share my thoughts on that. So initially, as a software engineer, I was very much like, a lot of software is open source. There is a bunch of stuff you can find off the internet and use and start integrating and building. Like the true product potential comes up when you combine a whole bunch of ideas and execute effectively and start making money by actually providing value to customers. The second part of that, providing value to customers, is the way we were thinking about it is, let's start broad. Like, let's file a broader patent. And the patent attorney kind of recommended like two levels of a patent, like one a very broad patent, which was like very generic, and one very specific to self-driving automotive patent. So the good thing is, the more generalizable the patent is, the like you can argue it out in court, right? The more generally applicable it is, but the likelihood of it getting rejected is also much higher because it's a very general idea, right? So I think the balance is, like, you can work with your patent attorney, like share everything that you have, and they will recommend that from this idea, can we file one patent? Can we file three patents? Can we file six patents? I think the difference comes down to like, how much are you willing to spend and where do you want to spend initially. So like for us, it was, let's build broader protection early on, and then as we scale out, we can go into more specifics. So that was sort of how we thought about it: start broad and then go specific as time progresses.
Interesting. Krijn, you guys?
Yeah, we tried as much as possible to patent things that we actually developed or were in active development. We didn't try to patent ideas quite as much because even then we didn't see the value of, we would sit and whiteboard some crazy ideas in our domain, and we had one or two patents in that space, but then we stopped doing that because it didn't seem to us like they they would end up being valuable from either an offensive or defensive perspective. Um, so that was our approach. Now, we weren't doing self-driving tech, right? We were doing more down to earth type product development, I think, like more near term, like you could actually build it and use it and widely apply it. So it might be different when you're doing more fundamental, R&D. But that's what we did. Now, are they valuable or are they overvalued? I think certainly if you look at all the money and time that's been put in patenting things and then the actual value of it, I think we've been wasting a lot of time and money, like hands down. Is it because you don't really know whether your company is going to survive for you to even have a lawsuit about them. Are you going to win or not, or just waste a bunch of money on lawyers? It's kind of like, it's kind of like NFTs. They're they're worth because people ascribe value to them, but is there inherent value in them? Well, not if you do nothing with them. They're 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 just a waste of time and money in that case, really. But
And so you're distinguishing between offensive and defensive patents.
Well,
can you clarify that for me?
Well, yeah. I mean, when you're developing a patent strategy, you got to think, what are you going to do with those patents, right? Are you going to have them in your back pocket to help with fundraising? Do you think that your competitors might infringe on your IP and you want to be able to go after them? Do you want to have, a bunch of ammo to throw against a competitor or a troll coming after you? So that, are you planning to go after people or just make it harder for people to go after you? So offensive or defensive, that's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at a patent is, is this an idea that might become useful in the future and you're just thinking about it because you're developing stuff in that space right now and it could be something of value? Or are you patenting something that you've just delivered and for sure is going to be in the hands of customers and competitors may try to copy, right? So is it a real thing or not? How close to it being a real thing is it? So those are all factors that go into a patent strategy, I think. We can dive a little deeper into that later if you want.
Yeah, I love that. So I love that. So let's talk a little bit then about the actual process. I know both of you have gone through that, and maybe Krijn, you can start us off by talking us through the steps that CTOs should consider, perhaps how you did it, what you learned in the multiple times you went through this process, and what that did for you.
Yeah. So once you've decided that you want to patent a particular idea, right? So you have, out of your strategy process came this idea as like, yeah, this is the next thing we want to patent. Or maybe it was more of the, C-suite type, we should totally patent this, go type. But at any rate, you're at the point where you're like, all right, let's go make this happen, right? What we would do is we would work in later on in our patent program. The ideas came from our engineers, not from the engineering leaders anymore. So we would help them articulate their idea in a way that seemed patentable, right? So we do a little bit of cursory search for prior art, make sure we're not completely wasting our time, and then just write out the idea in, break it down into some logical pieces so we could take that to our patent attorney to take it to the next step. And our patent attorney would look at it and give his assessment of whether this was patentable or not. We had a great patent attorney who would help. We would actually pull him into the brainstorming to make our ideas better, expand on it, and we'd end up with a draft, and then then you filed, and there's a few back and forths. They're called office actions. It's basically when the patent office sends you a note that says, yeah, here's all the prior art, or they have questions or whatever, and so you go back and forth with them to either drop it completely, or get your patent issued. And usually in that process, you have to narrow your claims because they find prior art. And when you narrow, excuse me, when you narrow the claims in a patent, you make it more specific, so less broadly applicable and therefore less valuable, right? So that's one strategy to get an idea that's too broad patented is you take the dependent claims. These are basically the bonus features that you've put in your patent application, and you make them a core feature of your patent, right? You're saying, instead of saying I'm patenting this or that, you make it this and that and that, and that now becomes your invention. So you kind of play that game. There are different strategies to finally get to an issued patent. And along the way, you spend about 40 grand on lawyers' fees and filing fees. And then hopefully you end up with a patent. That's the Krijn version of how a patent is made.
I love it. Tushar, for you, the process the same?
Not exactly. We had budget constraints, so we kind of did the startup thing. So there's this book called The Great CEO Within, which talks about how to work with lawyers, and it says that if you have something that you want to get done with a lawyer, like figure out how much you're willing to spend and tell them that upfront, and tell them what value you want out of that whole process. And we basically were able to apply that process, and this was a reflection that I had when I was reading the book afterwards, not necessarily when I was in the process. So we negotiated, like, for X dollars, I think it was around $10,000, we will get 3 patents out of this law firm. And we had some, like, one of our investors used to be a lawyer before, so that definitely helped in cutting down the search space very rapidly and figuring out who's the right lawyer for this specific stuff. And we probably got some discounts through that process as well. But I think the big part for us was thinking about, like, just doing the startup thing, like talk to the lawyer, start talking, tell them, hey, we need this. And then just working based on what they tell you, like, can you provide us X? And then we would do that. And we would just keep following up till the patent finally got approved. And then we had to decide between provisional patents versus full patents. So the provisional patents are ones that you can provisionally file, like your idea is not fully developed, or you're just trying to put it out there that, hey, we want to file something in this regard, so that when you're actually filing the full patent, you're fairly protected. And we got different advice on that. Some people were telling us you should, like, file the provisional early and then get the full patent, like, later. But that would be a whole different process, right? And so we went ahead with just filing, let's move with the full patent, let's just start the whole process, because the back and forth might take a longer duration, to the extent that once we filed the provisional, they kind of staged it. They said, okay, let's, never mind, like, we'll get you everything one after the other. So they started with filing the provisional patent, which went through the whole process. And post acquisition, we actually had to go through the full patent process till it actually came back to us. So doing all of that was, I think, a big part of our experience was think like a startup, figure out how to get the cheapest possible deal and keep iterating, and not worry about it as don't make it a focus. Because I think as a startup, if you make it your focus point, it can be very draining to know, like, is this patentable? Is this, like, you get into these conversations which are like, okay, can we make this more unique? Can we make this more specific? And that's like wasted founder time, to be honest. It's better to just have that conversation with the lawyer and let them figure a lot of these things out, rather than you trying to clarify the idea, which makes it patentable, right? You have ideas, just share those ideas with your lawyer, and then let them figure it out, like, what amongst all of this is patentable and what are the patents that you think make sense, rather than have a bunch of internal discussions, because that can just slow down the whole process, because you don't know, like, you're just guessing on prior art, you're guessing on a lot of these things, and they know exactly the domain. They know where to fish for this stuff. They know which are the current pending patents on that as well. So it's very hard for you as a person to like understand, but just reading through existing similar patents definitely helps in understanding what the lawyers are sort of looking for in the language. And yeah, and that's kind of how we took a stab at it.
Yeah, I think the a larger corporate enterprise processizing, operationalizing the process by, I mean, Krijn, that's pretty crazy. The attorney collaborating with you even to get the idea positioned in a way that is more, it sounds to me like you want to go as far up as you can on the generalized patent, and to have someone with such trust and relationship that you can collaborate with them on that. And then you have Tushar speaking to the earlier stage startups, maybe with budget constraints and challenges around founder time and all that, to just say, hey, what can I get for $10,000?
I like that, by the way.
Yeah, that's
Just up
exactly.
front, like, there you go. That's it. This is how much I want to spend. That's what I want to get out of it. Great suggestion to do with lawyers in general. Love it.
So lawyers are key to this whole process, right? You've got to pick the right one. So any tips on what missteps or any concerns? How do I pick this person?
I would say don't overthink it. I think sometimes people get into this thought process that like you won't know till you work with a lawyer, like what does a good lawyer even look like? But keep like training your gut instinct and be like hold your lawyer accountable like every other vendor, and think of them as a partner in the process, right? And add that milestones, add constraints, try to see where they are at in their organization, how much they're willing to support you. And if you have a lot of those conversations early, you can just get the ball rolling there. But don't spend too much time, because patents are like they're more in the nice to have bucket very early on. They're not in the must have bucket. So you want to audit your time, how much time you're spending in the patent process versus actually building the product. So like get to market, build your product. That's when the patent trolls will start attacking you, when you like raise money, when you start growing, right? So but you start putting those patent conversations started, because that way your timing on your patents becomes early in the whole cycle. So you can then explain in legal defense that, hey, I had this patent at this point in time, and then after 2 years I patented this other thing, and then I patented this other thing. So it's not like my idea that I patented like 6 years back was completely out of whack. It was something that there's a whole arc around our patents that we've filed right after that. So whatever we filed like 6 years back actually was something that was very important to our company. So so it's not just one patent that will create that defensibility. It is sort of how do you start incrementally. I think Krijn can talk to that more, but I think that kind of goes into the patent strategy side of the house, where let's just do something and iterate on it instead of trying to overthink a lot of these things. So that's, I guess, how we decided to move ahead with the lawyer. We've not done this before. These persons seem trustable, and this organization is trustable, and this budget makes sense. So if we try like 5 vendors and spend a lot of time figuring out like a patent vendor, that's just distraction from shipping a product and getting to market.
Yeah, I think you're right that you're really going to find out whether this is a good patent attorney for you once you're working on a patent. I do know there's certain things that so I didn't end up having to look for this patent. One of my colleagues had already worked with them, so this was an existing relationship. But what I really liked about working with this patent attorney was that in addition to being part of the group, trusted group of people who would, take ideas and make them better, not just, turn our technical mumbo jumbo into, legal/technical mumbo jumbo, which is the language that all patents are written in. It's a bit of a mind bend. But what I really liked about working with him is that he wasn't just collaborative with us. He was also very collaborative with the patent examiners, which was really, really helpful because you're basically you have another person who is like somewhat technical and somewhat legal on the other side at the patent office. You're trying to convince them of something, and their goal is to not let ideas that have previously been patented or ideas that are so simple that you could get them out of putting 2 or 3 patents together, letting those through. Right, they're gatekeepers, so their game is let's not let things through the gate. So you have to convince them sometimes to let you do stuff. And, in general, you don't convince people by yelling at them or being, combative with them. So having a patent attorney who is, who can, uh, who can understand the examiner's perspective and, politely, kindly convince them to do what you want is super helpful. We found this. We were at some point we started expediting every patent application. There's like expedited or priority filing. It costs like $1,000 or $2,000 extra, but you get your patent sometimes within a year, which is super fast for the patent office. And the other benefit that you get is that you can have a conversation with your examiner. Like you can actually, we were on a conference call with our attorney and the examiner. So instead of getting an email saying, here's prior art denied, you have a conversation with the person and you can ask them why. Why do you think this is prior art? And how does that apply to what we're trying to do? And that was super helpful because it pulled that examiner into a collaboration space with us in a way. I mean, the examiner is still on the other side, but you bring them in a little bit. So I think finding an attorney who understands that and is collaborative rather than combative, that's something to look for. And, you probably can figure out how to assess an attorney on, you can just ask them, what approach do you take? So I definitely recommend that. And once you have a good one, just keep working with them because you're it's just going to get easier and easier the more you work with that attorney, as opposed to working with different ones. You're going to be wasting thousands of dollars starting from scratch.
Very helpful. I'm intrigued by this must-have versus nice-to-have list. I wonder if we can collaborate now a little bit on when is it nice to have a patent and when is it a must-have. So I'll grab a pen and you can rapid fire some ideas for me on when is it nice to have one and when is it really important that you have 1 or 2 or 10. Do you want me to play some background music, some Dave Matthews Band, or?
This is an interesting question. I mean, from my personal experience, it never really felt like it was a must-have. It bordered on must-have, but it was always a thing that would increase the valuation of the company. It's about posturing a bit, and so there was value in it. There definitely was, and I'm pretty sure that it helped us with fundraising and finally getting acquired. But I don't. I am not 100% convinced that those things wouldn't have happened without it. But that's just me.
Yeah, I somewhat agree with Krijn on that. It always feels like it's nice to have, but in some ways, it's like the social contract of security and safety, right? Investing in your like authentication system early on and TLS certs on your backend infrastructure early on might seem like a lot of work. But once that's in place, you kind of have that engine revving all the time. And I feel that's a big part of the patent strategy as well. Once you have done a couple of patents, any new ideas, you can just keep that engine going and already budget for it. So it always feels like it's a nice to have, but you never know when it's like protecting yourself, right? You always do like it's a trade-off between speed and resources. And we kind of like started putting, and based on the space you are in, right? I think sometimes a bigger chunk of patents, a lot of them come in the devices space. Like the closer you get to hardware and the more you want to kind of do stuff in hardware, I think there is a lot more patentability and licensing things that happen in that domain, because it's much harder to like it's harder to understand. Like you can't just run your own like mpeg decoder, for example, in on device. You have to license it from an organization, right? So like video codecs, they're licensed, right? So but they're also open source video codecs, but they don't do that good of a job. So it's when it gets to like the algorithmic and hardware implementation of a lot of these things, I think that's where a lot of patent infringement can happen, and you can get really badly screwed, because recalling a software product or shutting down a software product is much more easier than doing a recall or shutting down a physical product. So I think when a lot of things come down to like physical products, there's a lot, it becomes more, it goes closer to the must have category. But if you're doing a lot of things in software, they kind of are bordering the must have, nice to have like line.
Yeah, and
Which, in a way, Krijn was inferring that they kind of borderline must have, but it felt like it wasn't quite getting to the must have column. Krijn, can you recall any of your patents where maybe internally you refer to it as a game changer or some sort of critically, wow, we're so happy we patented this? Or was it all seen as part of a patent portfolio strategy where the actual topic wasn't as important as the fact that it was an awarded patent that could go into the pile of patents?
yeah, I think ultimately that
Because you were a hybrid company. You were software and hardware
that's right.
at some point.
Yeah, yeah, I was software and hardware, and I mean that actually made patenting things easier because software patents are notoriously hard to enforce, and in recent years that's become harder because you can make anything up in software, and so it's a bit of a free for all there. I don't remember any particular patent being like, yeah, this is the game changer. Ultimately, the company got acquired, and our 40 somewhat patents were part of that package. So from that perspective, they turned out to be somewhat valuable. I think you know, I think there are two scenarios where you really do want to have them. One is, once you get successful and big enough that you want to protect your company, your IP, and the valuation of your company, right? So at that point, it becomes kind of like an insurance policy that where coverage kind of grows with every new patent you get, and you feel a little more secure, and people who might want to buy your company also get the warm and fuzzies, and it makes everything go easier, right? So there's that. And the other case would be if you're really like doing fundamental R&D and you have a unique idea, and it's technology that can be developed at some point by you or somebody else, and it's so brilliant that you can get a broad patent on it, and that thing itself becomes worth a lot of money. The problem with that is that it's really hard to know what is going to go that way, uh, because by definition, that's very early stage and it may never come to fruition. And it may just end up being a nice piece of paper. And, if you go for the plaque that hangs on the wall, you get that out of it. But if nobody ends up, if the world doesn't follow you on the path to that being, super useful and valuable technology, then it will never be anything more than a plaque, right? If you don't end up going public or getting acquired with that idea or whatever, then in hindsight, it obviously wasn't super valuable and necessary. So it's kind of hard to tell upfront, whether or not it's a nice to have or a must have. You really find out afterwards.
Got
So
it.
not very
Got it.
helpful.
So no, I think this is helpful in the sense that it does seem like a bit of a superfluous vanity exercise. A couple questions that I have is: have you been on the receiving end of a patent infringement where someone tries to come after you? What, in as much as you can you tell us about that, either of you?
I don't have any experience in that, so maybe Krijn is better at answering.
Yeah. Yeah, this I do have experience with that. That happened, and so the one time it was an actual like infringement, and we took the nice thing about patents is they're public, right? So if you need to get yourself out of infringement of a patent, the roadmap is right there. You just read what the patent claims, and then you just make sure you don't do exactly that thing. So that's what we did. We This was actually a massive project. We took the entire engineering and product team probably offline for like 4 months to focus on getting ourselves out of patent infringement before the legal deadline. And we created enough like hoops and loopholes to squeeze ourselves out of that patent infringement. So that was, I mean, in hindsight, it was kind of fun because we by then we were a large enough product development organization that we were working on way too many things at the same time, and it's kind of fun, to occasionally all fight a righteous battle together, right? So that's what it felt like. um, I miss those days. There was that. There was a patent infringement case that was like that. When we got DDoS ransomed was like that, and then when we had a bug in a new generation of devices and we DDoSed ourselves, that one was a little hard because we did it to ourselves. But the fights were fun. Um, so yeah, we basically just looked at the patent claims line by line, worked with attorneys to say, well, what if we did this? What if we did that? With that invalidated? What if we tried this other thing? We created a roadmap and then just got the whole team to work on, making the system changes, which were pretty extensive because of the broadness of the claim, and it was very much. This wasn't like a troll. This was very much in our space and very very broad. So we had to do quite some work to get out of it, but it kept us from having to stop selling our products. That was the threat. Was do you want to keep selling your products? Yes or no? Or at least that's what it felt like to us. So it was a real burning platform. And then another time we had a troll, and we scared it off. We scared it off with our we what did we do? I wasn't too involved with that, but it was one of those nonsense claims, and we didn't have to do much. We basically showed that we had a security system and the neighbors didn't, so they went to go, wiggle the neighbor's door instead. We didn't point them at the neighbors, but it was clear that we weren't going to just like roll over and let them do whatever. So they went away. But the problem with trolls is that a normal defense usually doesn't work, right? If you have your own patents and a competitor comes and claims you infringe on them, you can just give them all your patents and say, well, you infringe on all of these. And then they look at that and go like, well, now I have to go through 40 patents with those attorneys. That's going to be really expensive. I don't want to do that. A troll, they don't really have any patents that you could throw patents at them and they're like, well, we don't have any products, so we by definition we can't infringe on your patent, so who cares, right? That's the annoying part of trolls.
Yeah, and it just brings me back to, if I consider the viability of my company's future as CTO, and I want us to be successful for a long time, I want to build the moat around us. There is the competitive side, which is just row harder, faster, longer, and get more customers, do more branding, more sales and marketing, get out there. But then there's also let me take a look at what's under the hood of what we've built, and maybe I can pluralize what we've done as a maybe an idealistic view. Can I carve out a service based on the overall product that I've built as a new revenue stream? Do I have intellectual property that can be converted into its own service or its own product? Patenting clearly to me sounds like this nebulous world of, I don't know, just up is down and down is up, and no one really knows what's going on. Is there a way to protect your intellectual property that does not include patenting? I guess secrecy.
Well, yeah, I mean, patent is the opposite of secrecy, right? Because you're putting your inventions out there for the world to see. But it does give you the right to sue people if they infringe. I think at a certain stage, you probably want to have like a few patents just to check those boxes and not look unprepared. So at least do that. But in terms of protecting your intellectual property, making sure that your GitHub account is properly locked down, and that if CodeCov has a leak, you jump on it and you rotate all your application secrets and you make sure that you try to prevent stuff like that in the first place. Like, if you're a software company and you're like all the other software companies out there and you're using all these SaaS products to make your developers happy, that's probably where your risk is these days, is that all these tools that they use to analyze your code or do whatever, like that's you're sharing your intellectual property with a company, and you got to wonder, can I trust them, right? And I know it's not in vogue to do things on premise, but we had most of our stuff on premise at Greycall, and I got to tell you, it gave me a great sense of security that my own IT department, who I could call up, was there, and they took that protection job very seriously. Well, we're outsourcing that to all these like cool startups nowadays, and you see what could happen, right? So I think that's a bigger risk, is your code just being out there, your AWS keys being out there, or like I said earlier, open source software, licensing that have crept in because one of your engineers copy pasted some code and didn't check the license, and now you have to hand your stuff to whoever finds out for free because that's how it works. That, I think, those are better ways to protect your IP than patents.
And that's very interesting. And what about, so what did you mention? Code Cov.
Oh yeah.
What is that?
Well, okay, so that's a code analysis tool that you can integrate with your CI, in your CI tool chain. They over the last weekend they had there was a supply chain attack. There one of the tools, the Bash uploader tool that you can use from them, it had been compromised. So everybody who automatically got updates from them got a compromised one, and that would scan your code not to just see what your test coverage was, but if there were AWS keys or other secrets in there, and then send it to a server somewhere so that those people could go into your infrastructure and mess around with it. And that happened. So
That is that is so interesting to me, because I remember the days when GitHub first came out, that the talk on the street was, you're going to upload your code to another service? Are you crazy?
Yeah. I mean, what's the worst that could happen? And then it did. I mean, it was really quiet in our 7 CTO Slack on Monday, and I'm like, I know why. Everybody is trying to figure out whether they were hurt by this or not. It was like a ghost town.
It was very quiet. I was like, where is everybody?
They were all talking to their DevOps people.
And I also heard, I mean, I didn't hear it technically, but someone, just to kind of go down the conspiracy theory route, someone said to me, I think Amazon lost a huge... What was the recent story a couple months back when Amazon, I think they lost was it the Pentagon, or what did they lost a massive government contract to, I think, Google Cloud? Oh my goodness,
was
I
this
should do
last
better
year?
research, but
It's probably
I think
Microsoft.
Yes, it was Microsoft. You're right.
And I guess some of the speculation was that they didn't go with Amazon because your code isn't safe on AWS, because Amazon looks at your code, which that sounds crazy to me. But I mean, your code is out there. I mean, it's running on other data centers. I mean, I remember when code was on a floppy drive, and you're like, I'm not gonna just stick this floppy drive into any machine.
You mean a zip drive?
250 megabytes.
Yeah, I mean, it is a risk. I don't think Amazon looks at your code personally. That's hard to believe. But I mean, there are plenty of tools that will analyze your code, and they do it in the cloud. Testing for code coverage, doing static analysis, stuff like that. And those tools have to go look at your code. It's tricky.
Tushar, do you think that it's important that our code be safe?
I don't know. I think you need to keep capturing the market. Like, I'm a very startup market first person. If you can keep selling value to your customers, you can handle a lot of these blips in technology failure. I think solving customer problems, right? Like, I think what Amazon does really well is this customer obsession piece, which I think is a very important part, but not over obsessed. Sometimes I think Amazon over obsesses about their customers. But yeah, I think that idea that if you can keep generating revenue, right, you can afford the litigation, right? You can afford any blips in your anything that comes your way. But if you're not able to capture the market, you kind of start taking this like non-zero sum approach, or you start taking the zero sum approach, like where it is like whatever I gain is their loss, right? So that's kind of the perspective that patent trolls probably operate on, is they didn't look at this, so let me try to make some money out of it so that they lose money. But if you believe to some extent in capitalism, it's like a positive sum game approach, right? You do something better, we do something better, together we push humanity forward. So that's sort of how I think of it.
Good. Am I echoing or are you guys good?
You are
were echoing for a minute,
Oh,
yeah,
man,
but
yeah.
you're good now.
Am I? Because my
Oh yeah, no, I
AirPods
can
just
hear you.
died. So, can you hear me or can you hear yourself?
Both.
I can hear myself.
Oh, man. Give me 1 second. Krijn, you've got me on this whole other vibe right now about how to protect ourselves.
Oh, I'm sorry about
super
that. Or is it a
inspired,
good thing?
so I can't.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. Or is it a good thing?
No, I can't let go of you guys now. So give me 1 second. Why the heck?
You could mute your microphone when you're not speaking.
Yeah, that probably
Okay.
helps.
I will mute myself when I'm not speaking, Tushar. Okay. So I just, if I consider when a patent is valuable, I can't help but think that it's sort of at the tallest trees catch the most wind situation, like public events, liquidity events, acquisitions, it's like, okay, let's go. And deep pockets, like, oh, geez, they just raised $1 billion. I'm going to go dip my toes in that honey pot. And toes is a euphemism. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's sort of how it's the story that you will tell the judges, or like if you get into litigation of any shape or form, it's kind of your technology uniqueness arc. The way I look at it is, we uniquely build XYZ over the last 7, 8, 10 years, and it basically can be used. Like, I can't just, like, it's hard to get trust that you are actually thinking about X at the same time as somebody else. But when you patent it, you have like a legally, like, I guess a legal milestone that at any point in the future, when somebody comes asking questions to you, you are like, we did this at this point in time. So whatever I am claiming in a litigation is probably true because it's backed by a patent, versus I'm just making a claim, right? Like, let's say Krijn and I had the same idea today, and I patent it and Krijn does not. If we get into some like legal litigation at some future point in time, like, who will the court believe, right? So the person who has followed the legal process to put their stake in the ground that this is what we are doing, versus somebody who's not put that stake in the ground and might have the same idea. There's nothing stopping from, like, in the it's like a half truth that the legal entity will, like, which side will get the support. Even though you might have had the idea before me, it doesn't matter in legal language and in legal transactions. It will all come down to who actually patented it versus who had the idea first. So it's most about, like, who had the idea first is what you're trying to establish in the patent process, not necessarily is your idea unique or is your uh, idea. Yeah, that's kind of how I think of it.
Yeah, it's almost like the process of patenting could be more valuable than the actual outcome, because you're forming relationships with attorneys that can guide you, lead you, especially if you trust them. They can probably be there with you as well, like Krijn said, in the collaboration. phase to kind of ward off potential issues in the future. So you're arming yourself with information. Secondly, the patenting process in terms of documenting everything, scanning for license vulnerabilities. All these things seem like good and prudent things to do, regardless of whether you plan on filing a patent. Thoughts, Krijn?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely the process itself is valuable. Thinking about what is valuable and important and unique about the technology or products that you've developed, I think it's a good exercise. And if you're working, in a startup or even at like a growing organization that's not really a startup anymore, you don't really get a chance to sit down and do that a whole lot. So, it's partly cathartic to do that, and you probably get a lot of value out of that. I think for most companies, like if you get to the point where you have product market fit and you have success and your revenue is growing, I you know you're the you have something to protect, so the patents could be useful in that. But if your goal is to get acquired or go public, then probably your growth is much more important, and the patents are more like window dressing, right? Once your product actually sells, people are going to buy you for that success, not for the technology that underlies it. That's what I personally believe, and so in most cases,
I think it's very.
so in most cases.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think in most cases, by the time a patent is valuable, or could be valuable, it's not the most valuable thing anymore. Um, and if I think about like when I perform due diligence on a company that is to be acquired, I don't really spend a whole lot of time on patents. Like people would call me in to find the skeletons in the closet, to find all the reasons not to do a deal. And looking at security and the other aspects of IP protection, like have you been sloppy with your source code? Are there leaks somewhere? Things like that are much easier targets than whether or not your patent is there or valuable. So I don't think it should be at the top of mind and the top of your focus, even when you're close to getting acquired. I think there are more important things to worry about.
Yeah, I think just to add a little bit to what Krijn shared, and I think what Etienne you were hinting towards, I think the process forces you to understand what is the prior art even in that space, and what you might like, which company's patents you might be likely to infringe at a future date, right? So it kind of forces like it's kind of you're doing your own technical due diligence against like legal uh, issues that you might run into in the future, right? So if I try to patent something related to a smartphone, I'll probably run into Apple, Samsung patents very aggressively. So if I'm trying to build a new type of smartphone, the first thing I will do is probably file a patent for that. And I will learn that this is the technology space I can actually go into without infringing Apple and Samsung's patents, or like I should stay away from these areas. So it kind of helps you guide your like technology roadmap as well, because you don't want to get to a point where okay, I tried to patent this, I failed at patenting this specific thing because the prior art was specific to Apple. Even though you might end up with the patent, you might just be very in the neighboring patent almost to something that Apple or Samsung might have already done. But then slowly when you're thinking about your product, you might not end up going down that product direction, even though you might have a patent in that specific area, because you realize that that's a very like patent heavy uh, area. So Apple and Samsung are very aggressively pursuing that strategy in the next 4 to 5 years. So the likelihood of you even winning in that, like based on technology, based on superior ideas, is very like unlikely, because a lot of the prior art that is coming out is from like the top tech companies in that specific area. So I think it also forces you to do that process, because otherwise, if I'm coming up with a new idea at my company currently, I'm not going to go and look what are the patents in that area, unless I say, okay, this is a unique idea in this space, I want to patent it. Then we go through the whole prior art, the law, the legal process, and then even if there is an infringement at a future date, you've done all of that process before, and you can just pull up all that documentation and say, this is a good like next step towards solving this like legal challenge. And you kind of have built this like sort of asset repository of legal protections and how to address legal challenges in the future. So it's kind of your like wearing your legal hat as a CTO.
I
Patents
think
fall.
honestly, I think we're onto something. This to me is where we're starting to create gold, because I love what you said, Tushar, about your own tech due diligence. You follow these processes. So I absolutely love what Krijn said about where this would fit in your due diligence, especially with acquisitions, in terms of your access, authorizations, your code base, your leaks, your sloppiness. I love how seems to be a progression for me in terms of really where we should focus as CTOs. And then I love what you say around asset repo in the sense of your legal asset. It's almost like a hiring funnel, right? You shouldn't be working on your hiring funnel when you need someone. That should have been done months ago, so that when you do need someone, you can tap into that funnel. And I guess with the patent process, with all these different pitfalls along the way, these are just, to me, ways in which CTOs can shield their companies by actually subjecting themselves to this, I guess, often utmost boring, utmost frivolous process. But I mean, I've seen Krijn go through audits and due diligence, and boy, when there's a lot of money at play, there's a lot of risk, there's a lot of reward. Everyone's looking at that due diligence process, and everyone's nervous about the leaks and all that. So I think this is a very interesting point to land on. I think I'm an exceptional.
You're an exceptional something.
Woo. Okay, so we only have a few minutes left. So if you want to add something, let me know. But the final thing I wanted to just talk about is the Krijn. At the very beginning, you mentioned you helped your engineers with their own ideas for patents, and this is something that I've heard before, where companies will, as a benefit slash cultural thing, as an innovation incentive, come alongside their engineers and help them win patents.
Yeah, and we did that so they would create patents for the company. That usually when you become an employee of an American corporation, you sign this thing that says that all your inventions are theirs for the duration of that contract, right? So we would pay them $1 for the patent because you have to. I think they can't just give it to you. You have to buy it from them or something like that. But in our patent program, for every patent, there was a $2,000, I believe, award, and the inventors would share that, right? So if you created a patent by yourself, you get $2,000 for creating that IP for the company, which I thought was pretty cool. But I think the most important thing for them was the pride, right? I have a few patents, and I'm happy that LinkedIn makes that a separate part of your profile. It looks cool. And I know that engineers, it really grew their pride. Like, okay, I didn't just write software. I didn't just make a product for someone. I created a patent. Like, this is my intellectual property too. I'm an inventor. And that part was really cool. So what we would do is, every, month or two, we would meet as a committee, and people, we'd have a little simple template that people would fill out. and could propose that we start exploring a patent into whatever area they were working in. And what we would look at, how does it fit in with our strategy? And then if we decided, yeah, let's go for it, we would sit and help them turn, software designs or, actually looking at code, and we would try to, expand on it a bit and try to create claims out of it. Because it's, there, once you've done a few patents, it becomes kind of easy, but there's a little bit of a learning curve of like the special kind of legalese that you need to understand, in the structure of a patent that you need to understand before you can write it. So we would help them with that, pretty hands on, but it was their idea, right? So they would be the inventors, they would get the reward, but we just help them do it, and that's how we got to 40 patents in 5 years or something. It's really a team sport.
Very interesting.
It's really a team sport at that point.
I love it. I love it. Although I think $2,000 is a joke, bro. Seriously, for a patented idea.
It's better than nothing. Most companies are just like, it's the honor or something.
Dude, nothing is actually better than $2,000. No, wait, how does that work? That's the other way around, right?
Yeah. Well, we paid him a salary too, so there's that, and benefits.
Okay. The reward of continued employment. I love that. No, I'm just joking. That's brilliant. So I feel like the progression that I'm landing on in my head, and you're welcome to tell me that this is shit or this is great, is as far as shielding your company, there's access, and who has access to my code, who is authorized to do what with my code, in my infrastructure. So maybe it's access to your infrastructure. The second thing I'm hearing is then your code scanning, dependencies, licenses, and who has access to your code and which services have access to your code. And the third thing for me would then be the actual licensing. So where am I vulnerable in terms of open source tools that I'm using and libraries that I've incorporated into my code? And then maybe as a fourth thing, or as sort of the top tier thing, you're starting to talk about patenting and sort of going sort of the legal route. Does that sound like a nice progression, or does that sound like I wasn't listening for the last 2 hours?
I think they're the right items. Nowadays, open source software usage should be at the top of your list, or that should be number one, because we all use it everywhere, and that I think is the biggest risk item, that you definitely need to look at that, because the impact of having one piece of code with the wrong license in your code base is just astronomical. And so that should be at the top of your list. But other than that, those other things are probably more important than patents. Yeah.
I love it. Tushar, Krijn, any final comments, maybe some observations about how wonderfully I facilitated this conversation or something like that? Anything like that?
Yeah, I think it was a great conversation to hear from people who actually run a patent program. It actually sort of inspires me to think about what are the right incentive structures to set up in a organization to make sure teams can patent ideas and not necessarily just keep doing their job on a day-to-day basis and say like, oh yeah, I came up with something unique while I was working with this person at this company, and it was a great experience, especially as a manager. I think creating that right incentives so that people feel that they can patent stuff and they should patent stuff because it helps the company in the long run is definitely valuable, because it gives you a sense of pride and sense of joy that I'm an inventor, as Krijn put it. So yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, I was kind of
Very, very
inspired by
good,
your.
Tushar.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was kind of inspired by your quote on 3 pens for $10,000 with a law firm. That's uh, I I'm gonna try and do that next time, because we definitely spend much more than that. We could afford it, but most startups can't and shouldn't spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on that. And then no, I thought Chen, you were pretty good too. I mean, there's a little bit of echo, but other than that, things went pretty well. No, seriously, I enjoy this, and
Okay, James.
I
Well,
like it. I enjoy this, and I like it.
I love it. Thank you so much for hanging with me on this. Super, super, super helpful. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
Stop.
Thanks.
Okay, cool. So stop. So now I'm going to stop this.